What do a breast pump, Vladimir Putin, and the war in Ukraine have in common? Welcome to Talking Tactics. Today's episode is about a topic that has been flying around in the news cycle for months. So-called semiconductor chips, they're everywhere. In our smartphones, dishwashers, even LED bulbs. Obviously, they're used in just as many things military, from communications devices to missiles to fighter jets, even in some firearms. So no chips, no war. This was one of the ideas behind the countless sanctions imposed on the Russian Federation after its full-scale invasion of Ukraine in February 2022. Ukraine's allies wanted to severely limit the exports of goods to Russia to minimize or at least limit the country's military potential and the resulting damage on Ukraine. But is it working? Western policymakers have been celebrating their own decisions. According to a statement by the US Department of Commerce, since the start of the invasion, Russia's access to semiconductors from all sources has been slashed by nearly 70% thanks to the actions of the unprecedented 38-nation coalition. Russia, of course, is not giving up that easily. And there are many companies around the world that wouldn't leave out any opportunity to make money. So it seems that Russia is still getting its share of semiconductor chips, and what seems to be happening is that they are using so-called transshipment points, so places where goods are legally purchased and then sent on to Russia or Belarus avoiding sanctions. Those locations include China, Hong Kong, Malaysia, but also Russia's closer neighbors like Armenia, Turkey and Kazakhstan. The method: to buy common home appliance items and strip them for parts. And because companies are not allowed to sell them directly to Russia, someone else buys them and then passes them on. That's it. Here are some statistics. According to data compiled by the media outlet Bloomberg from the EU's Eurostat database, in the first 8 months of 2022, Armenia imported more washing machines from the EU than in the 2 years before. Another example, in August 22 alone, Kazakhstan imported European refrigerators worth $21.4 million, more than 3 times the amount for the same period in the year before. Exports of electronic breast pumps from the EU to Armenia almost tripled in the first half of 2022 compared to the previous year, although Armenian women gave 4.3% fewer births at the same time. Similarly, Kazakhstan's import of breast pumps from the EU increased in the first half of 2022 by 633%, even though the country's birth rate fell by 8.4%. In the same time, the country delivered $7.5 million worth of washing machines to Russia, compared to almost zero in the previous 2 years. The dangers. What can a semiconductor chip from a breast pump actually be used for in a military sense? The type of microchips found in things like fridges are mostly simple microcontrollers, which tend to enable simple tasks within a larger, more complex system. Some weapon systems contain hundreds of these chips, so they are not the key component. What makes a high-tech weapon system like a precision-guided ammunition so high-tech are more unique and sophisticated chips. So it's not very likely that Russia is building a new super weapon out of an LG microwave. But, according to EU officials, we have already seen parts of commercially available home appliances in Russian tanks. Here at United 24, we're no technology experts, so we can only research and still don't have all the answers. If you have any idea as to how the Russian army could use parts found in common electronic items, please write it down in the comments below. Anyways, this process of MacGyvering is not so unusual. Ukrainians do it with commercial drones, rebels in Myanmar print guns with a 3D printer, and the Russians, as we see, use plastic bottles for their UAVs. So of course the use of chips from home appliances to replenish some deficit they have is a logical move from their side. But, and this is an important but, while all these facts and figures for now give us some pretty strong indications, we cannot be sure how big of an impact the sanctions have actually had on the Russian war economy, also how many of these home appliances they're buying are really being used for warfare, and how much are just to compensate consumer demands. Economic sanctions, or at least their effects, are felt more often by the common population than the government, whether in Syria, Afghanistan or Russia. The country's elite, government and army are less impacted than hoped for. At the same time, the production of household appliances inside Russia has decreased by up to 40%. But apart from the Russians fleeing the country and those dying in Ukraine on the front line, the population has not undergone some huge demographic change. So, the amount of washing machines needed in Russia remains the same. An article by Forbes warned that the worry about this topic might be overrated. We will really only know what was going on inside Russia, their military as well as their economy after the war has ended. The story, however, does show us a couple of things. A large part of the world's army's capabilities and technologies are provided by the private sector. so by companies whose driving factor is to make money, something that is known to transcend boundaries set by nation-states or more abstract concepts such as good or evil. An August study by the British Royal United Services Institute found 450 unique foreign-made components in 27 advanced Russian weapon systems. A majority of those were manufactured where? In the United States of America and in Europe. One example is the Russian 9M727 cruise missile, which after being examined in Ukraine was found to be containing microcontrollers, programmable chips, and signal processors stamped with the names of American chip makers, including Texas Instruments Inc., Altera, owned by Intel, Xilinx, owned by Advanced Micro Devices Inc., AMD, also chips made by Cyprus Semiconductor Corporation, now owned by Germany's Infineon AG. Granted, some of these chips were already decades old, but the news agency Reuters reviewed Russian customs records and found more than 15,000 shipments of Western electronic components that reached Russia after its invasion of February last year. The manufacturers once again included the same companies: AMD, Infineon, Intel, and Texas Instruments. In other words, to stop countries like Russia from really being able to develop and produce weapons in the amount that they do, we need to think about how we lead companies to business in an ever more complex global market that offers thousands of ways to bypass any rules and regulations. Thank you for watching Talking Tactics. Hit like and subscribe, and be sure to check out our next episode.